Hello everybody, this is Sir Cheddar here, and I'm going to be bringing a very short and quick video about a keyboard that I designed and created in my collection. This keyboard is called the Level, also known as the Level V1 because this was the very first of the Level series I had ever created. This keyboard was created between 2016 and 2017, and it is a 65% flat keyboard with an acrylic 1.5 millimeter plate and an aluminum case with a height of approximately 0.75 inches. I can't translate that to millimeters off the top of my head, unfortunately. This keyboard was created with a floating key design and is held together by 10 screws, which you can see here. I've already undone them so that I can open up the keyboard easily. The keyboard itself is two pieces, and you can see the aluminum case here. It has little holes on the bottom, which the idea behind these was to allow for some sort of angling feet if you want, because the keyboard itself is very flat. However, in reality, this is probably not a good solution because it's not really designed for the aluminum feet. It doesn't have any sort of threading on it. You'd have to lock the aluminum feet in from this side, but the case itself is very tight fitted to the PCB, so you might not even have space to. I just added them in as a last minute idea to allow for potential angling. I'm sure you can get it angled if you put in some elbow grease and some effort to figure out the best way to do it, but I had never completely thought that part of this keyboard through. It was just something totally extra that I added in very quickly. And the bottom has these rubber feet here. Ooh, it looks like I lost focus for a second there. The bottom of the keyboard has these rubber feet. I didn't do any sort of machining to allow for these feet to fit in any sort of holes, so they just kind of stick on the flat surface, and I just placed them in a location that seemed good to me. In reality, this is not. I do like this style of rubber feet, but I think that they should be cut to a specific size. It's not so clean looking. It's really just like a very, very quick solution to creating the rubber feet so that your keyboard wouldn't move around. It is very hefty though. That's a very interesting point of this keyboard is it has a lot of extra material on the sides and also the bottom too. The side walls themselves aren't too bad either. It has been described as a brutalist aesthetic, which I didn't have in mind. I was going for my own style aesthetic, but I do like that styling, so I think it's cool that somebody kind of connected the dots with that. My reasoning behind this styling was, as I recall, was I wanted to have a heavier keyboard, but I didn't want to add material to the bottom of the case so that it sit higher profile because I wanted it to sit lower to the desk for more comfortable typing experience. And I also didn't want to add material to the front or the back because on my old desk this would have meant that this would have been touching my monitor area, which I wasn't going to be so comfortable with, because this would kind of change where if you add material to the back of the case here, it would change where the keyboard itself was going to sit on my desk, and if I added material to the front, then it would mean that my hands would potentially have to sit farther away from the front of the keyboard, which would maybe make it less comfortable typing experience as well. So that was all my reasoning for this design, and this is kind of how it ended up after all was said and done. I did run this keyboard in a sort of small run, kind of like a group buy. I produced something like between 10 and 15 parts in total, and I've sold all of them except this final one, which I still have in my collection, but I might be parting ways with. I'm not sure. I For the group buy itself, they were produced with aluminum plates rather than acrylic plates. The reason for this is that you can see here that the space between the end of the plate and the screw hole is really small, and I had it cracking. I liked the aesthetic with the acrylic plate, but but the cracking made me too concerned about providing it to customers, so I decided to just go with a countersunk aluminum plate. Also, countersinking the aluminum was less of a hassle than the acrylic, because the acrylic I actually had to do manually, whereas the aluminum can be done during the manufacturing process easier. It was just less of a hassle for me. I'm sure there's ways to handle acrylic being countersunk well, however, not with this design because it's too thin at the ends of the plate, which is something I didn't really consider during the design process as much, and I didn't want to change the aesthetic too much. I really didn't want to change design too much because I was hesitant once I had a design that I had already prototyped and I was relatively happy with. I didn't want to have too many further changes. Another thing which I could have improved upon is you can see that the keyboard, I offset the plate from the case 1 millimeter. Looking back, that was way too much. Even a quarter of a millimeter is easily enough. This definitely had too big of a gap in between there, which I'm not a big fan of, but it's definitely something I've learned and continue to improve upon. And lastly, I did create this plate as allowing for plate mounted stabilizers, and I also just selected the bottom row that is my favorite, but I did support for different control options and different backspace options, so I went with the split backspace here and the offset control because those are personally my favorite. In my newest versions, I'm talking about like past version 5 of the level, I'm starting to allow for more bottom plate options because I'm actually trying to make those for more people than just myself. But at this point, I was really laser focused on just creating my design, and if somebody wanted it, they could have it. So I went that direction back then. I guess I can quickly talk about the switches, but they're very non-specific. They're vintage black switches. I have this stock of some interesting vintage black stems that I have, and I've thrown them into Gateron switches, and I loop them with Krytox, and the stabilizers themselves are vintage cherry stabilizers. I used to do a lot of salvaging from old keyboards at e-waste and some junkyard locations that I had found. However, I haven't been doing this for quite a while. I'm not really focusing on that anymore. But I did create a very large stock of a specific type of vintage black that I was really into. And the way I was able to differentiate these from other vintage blacks is they actually have a specific color to them. It's different than other vintage blacks that I've seen. And I kind of grouped them all, and I still have, I think, like 300 stems left, and I like them because they're unique for me. So I keep a stock ready, but yeah, they're not too much different than any other linears, I think. So yeah, so I guess quickly I will show the PCB. This is from Win Keyless, and it's a 22 mini PCB. However, when I had sold these boards, I had a different circuit board created that had my brand at the time attached to it, and it was black with gold gold lines on the PCB, but gold traces, but that was also just a bootmapper client PCB, which is basically my favorite PCB key mapper. But now I think QMK is pretty user friendly, so I think QMK now is a great choice for anybody interested. And this was mini USB, which was pretty popular at the time, but I think now people are mostly focused on USB-C, which I really like USB-C too. So, and I'm getting a bunch of USB-C cables from other products now, so I think it's a good choice as well. Lastly, I did create a very in-depth commentary. I just reviewed the script actually that I had written for it a few years ago on this level project, and it's like 3 pages long. I did do a read through of that for our podcast, the board podcast. However, I as if anybody has known, I've been absent from that podcast for quite a while because I've been focusing on other things, but I will be including that at the end of this video in case you want to hear more about this project, and I will definitely just tack that on to the end of this so you can hear about it any further if you're interested. And I think that'll be everything for this actual video review of the keyboard, though. I guess I'll just do a once over of the shape just in case anybody's interested. There you can see the thickness. There's the USB cutout. I did it in the most lazy way imaginable, just cutting a slot through the actual case. And you can see there the chamfer. That's all the way around. The corners are not too particularly sharp, though they do look sharp. This corner could be considered sharp, but everything else is radiused, so it's not like dangerous at all or anything. Okay, well, thank you everybody for taking a look at this video. I really appreciate it, and I will be trying to go through all of my keyboards, especially ones that I think I'm letting go in my collection. I'll definitely be trying to create a video discussing them before I do that, so that we have my comments on the keyboards as they're in front of me for, I guess, for record keeping purposes and such. So thank you everybody, and have a great day. Hello everyone, this is Sir Chatter from the board, bringing you a mini episode on the Level Keyboard project, which I championed. So the Level Keyboard project was something that I had in the works over the summer of 2017. I had done a bit of keyboard case design before this, but I had never felt like I had a real direction with it, so there was never much force behind my ideas. However, beginning that summer, I started to narrow down on a design that I really wanted. I wanted to have a flat, low-profile keyboard with a large bezel that was either a 65% or a 75%. I ended up deciding later on the 65%. I also wanted to design a keyboard that was easy to manufacture, which would make it actually affordable to have made, because if the design gets too complicated, a lot of the times the price becomes a bit prohibitive to prototype, and I was originally just doing this for my own desires. The project was on the back burner for me until I had the proper amount of time to begin it. So over that summer, I was pretty busy with an internship as well as some other projects I had. And so I continued to push the start date back. However, in the first quarter of my senior year at university, a project came up where we have to design, manufacture, and sell 100 units of a complex product. I saw this as a perfect opportunity to do a keyboard project, and I tried very hard to convince my group that a keyboard was viable. And I tried to very quickly post for feedback,
to get the board to a place where people had confidence on it. And this ended up creating some backlash. The problem was that I had a group of 12 students and one professor. Many of them were telling me that they don't think a keyboard is viable, and I was under a great deal of pressure to show tangible results between 1 and 2 weeks, which is pretty crazy. I put in maybe 40 hours of work while being a full-time student in these 2 weeks, or maybe in less than 2 weeks actually, but on working on new renditions and redesigns based off of people's feedback from Slack as well as Reddit. However, in the end, I ended up posting too much for many people's likings. I got some bad press from a few people, and a table meme was created based off my keyboard, which got posted on Reddit. And I guess any press is good press, but I didn't feel good about the situation. Behind the scenes, I had aggressive expectations from team members in my class, and I had a lot to prove to them. This took me to a bit of a breaking point where I just had to say that the keyboard project right now was not worth it, and that I would just do the project on my own when I have the time. On a side note, the idea that ended up getting produced for the class was a coffee table. It was a combination of wood and steel. This ended up being an incredibly challenging project that took our team over 4,000 hours throughout the 10-week quarter, but it was still a good experience, and during that time, I tried to slowly move my level project forward. Around this time, I had actually decided that a 65% would be the form factor, so I had Alex at Pank help me source the circuit boards. Alex really made the process easy and affordable, and I owe him hugely for this part of the project. Alex, if you ever do listen to this, you are seriously the man. You're one of the coolest people I know. The PCB ended up being a PS2 AVR based B-Fake PCB with RGB underglow, and it was colored black. Because the contacts, the soldering points are gold, and there was actually writing on it that was gold for a logo I made, it looked really pretty. The logo that was made was for Keyboard Defender, which was a domain I purchased that I wanted to use for the sale, but I ran out of time to develop the website as well as that idea more, and so I ended up having to table that for now. Around this time, I also basically completely stopped taking feedback from people. Designing a product and then posting it for feedback is amazing, and being able to do that with the advent of the internet is awesome, but the feedback has to be controlled. Posting on RMK, while it might seem like a good place for something like this, was far from controlled, and this brought some detractors, which brought negative energy into the project, which I wanted to avoid. An interesting question I did receive from an outsider of the keyboard community, this is a total side note tangent, but was why do we often choose aluminum to create keyboards out of? And why did the one I make, the level, why did I select aluminum for that? And my response to this, I'm not entirely sure if any of this is correct or not. So this is just my guesses, assumptions, and from my memory. So this could be false, so do not make any decisions based off of what I'm saying. But from what I understand, aluminum is softer than other materials like steel, and it's easier and faster to CNC than for example steel. And while it is more expensive than steel in weight, the same size piece of steel will end up costing more because it is heavier. So, because it is a denser material, aluminum can also be colored with anodizing, and anodizing also seals the metal from tarnishing, as I understand it, which allows for a lot of nice finishes and color options, whereas steel has to be colored with a limited number of methods, which aren't as flexible as, for example, the coloring of aluminum. Okay, moving back to the project. The main design feedback I got originally was that the bezel was too big around the keyboard. For those of you that don't know what a bezel is, that's the extra space between where the letters were and the edge of the keyboard's aluminum case. I reduced it constantly, and in the end, some people asked why it wasn't bigger. But that's all fun, and clearly everybody has different desires, and you can't satisfy them all. The other big comments I got was that the countersinking was definitely desired, and people really disliked the top screws showing. I could have designed the keyboard so that the screws were hidden, but I was going for a more industrial look, and I kept the top screws showing in the end. I did learn a little bit about plates during this process. I originally wanted to have a thicker plate, such as a 3mm, but many people requested a 1.5mm. I learned that anything thicker than 1.5mm, switches don't consistently clip into the plate or aren't able to, and this makes the building process for these switches and the circuit boards and the keyboards and the keyboard assembly process more difficult and inconsistent. And while a thicker plate has the opportunity to provide a unique selling point for keyboards, a 1.5mm plate is really just more versatile for switch options and usable. It also has many benefits to being cheaper to have prototyped as well as manufactured because it's less material. I went through 5 prototype rounds. On a few of the orders, I ordered 2 units to see how the quality compared unit to unit. The first was raw aluminum. The factory actually made some errors on the screw tapping. However, they noticed this in QC, and they sent me the second unit as well as the original one with the mistap screws to play around with. For these, I used an acrylic plate, which allowed for underglow to shine through from the underneath. I really like this style because it created an illuminated plate rather than an illuminated bottom case, which is unique. However, with the locations of the screws, it put a thin, soft material like acrylic at risk. The edge of the plate was too close to where the screw tapping was, and so it created a weak point where the plate had the opportunity to crack. I ended up getting feedback that having countersinking plates was extremely important, as I mentioned earlier, and I really did agree in the end after experimenting with the plates. I ended up experimenting with countersinking the acrylic. At first, it was okay. It didn't crack during the drill pressing process or the usage, but eventually I broke one when I was screwing it in, and I realized that if a customer broke a plate, they would have to rebuild the entire board likely, which would be a very poor customer experience. And so that I decided that I would have to cut out the acrylic plates of the sale for now. In the future, I would try to offer something like polycarbonate. This material is stronger than acrylic, and I think it wouldn't have the same problems, but I believe that 1.5mm thick polycarbonate has unique manufacturing requirements, and it may have to be CNC'd, which adds a lot of complexity as well as cost to the process. And I didn't have time to work this out on the first run, so I ended up moving forward with aluminum as the only plate option. I had placed the order before Chinese New Year's for 10 keyboard cases and plates, which I had fronted the money for. At this point, I had already had all the printed circuit boards created, and I actually had already had them on hand. However, the making of the keyboard cases was delayed till March because even though I had placed my order before Chinese New Year, there was other projects which were ahead of me, and that means that I didn't get them till mid-March. Luckily, I had a personal deadline of needing them to be shipped out by the end of March, and I had reached that because they arrived just in time. And combining the prototype process into a small paragraph, despite all the information, diagrams, files, pictures, and notes I had sent the manufacturer, the quality didn't reach what I had wanted. The anodizing was pretty looking, but it was also inconsistent, as well as the color. The surface finish wasn't as clean as I had hoped, and a few of the units, as well as plates, had numerous points of scratching. The kit that I ended up selling included a PCB, an aluminum countersunk plate, 4 sets of screws, the aluminum case, and bump-on feet. The problem, I think, came down to the fact that the factory was very industrialized and it wasn't really meant or experienced in retail style products. This was definitely a product that needed an aesthetic element, and this was what lacked in the end. I had done my best to educate as well as work with the manufacturer to get the quality to what I had wanted, but in the end they had missed the mark. I ended up holding the sale for individual units with individual timestamps on MechMarket. All the units sold very quickly in 2 days, and I had them all shipped by the time I wanted to. I did package them very nicely and safely. For anyone listening who purchased one, I hope you can nod in approval of this. And I did get plenty of comments on MechMarket saying stuff along the lines of they'd be interested in a round 2. So will there be a round 2? I want to make a round 2, but not at the moment. I'm very busy and will update on this as soon as I can. If there's a round 2, the design will be improved though. There are many little details I've noticed throughout the time that the round was ended that I think can be adjusted and will make the product better with virtually no cost added. I also ordered a prototype of a version 2, which had an integrated plate and was angled. I thought it was an awesome idea in when designing it, and when I got it in person, I was really excited. It looks really impressive and unique, and I had posted pictures of this on RMK. The round 2, if it happens, will likely have a choice between 2 options, a flat one as well as an acrylic level, and I'm hoping that both of them have integrated plates because I think that that is a unique design feature which I'm a big fan of personally. Doing this from start to finish, I learned a lot about communicating with manufacturers. Sometimes it's extremely difficult to get what you want communicated to them, despite the fact that you can provide files with descriptions and measurements. And there are so many little changes that add time, effort, and extra cost, which are pretty much impossible to understand from the start of the project if you are not experienced in this. I've received a lot of nice messages from happy customers, but my long-term goal is to get the keyboard consistent enough to be able to sell them not individually, but as a product, which are all the same. For example, this round I had to sell each unit individually numbered and marked because the quality wasn't consistent enough and the color wasn't consistent enough. This was a little bit disappointing to me, but this has set a good goal, which I believe is attainable for the next round, which I'll be trying to go for. This will also make packaging them much easier because I won't have to wait for individual units to be sold. I can just already have them wrapped up and ready to go and just put a shipping label on them. So this is what I'll be moving forward to in the following weeks, months, and years. Probably not weeks. Probably going to not be doing this for at least a month. I'm a little busy right now. And thanks to everybody who has supported the project. I wanted to list some names. However, I don't know if I'm going to get all of the names listed. I guess I'll just start with the list now, though. I wanted to thank Dawn, Alex at Pink, Teacher's Pest, DOS Gnome, Coda, Jetpack Tuxedo, The Beep Haha, Tim Zilla, James Lai, Rageface, ZLPC, SNC Brax, Mech Merlin, Busgamer. There are plenty of other names of people who did help me throughout this process. So if I did miss your name, I'm sorry, but I did truly appreciate your help. This was an interesting journey, and I'm thankful that I did it and that I went through the effort to do it, and I learned a lot, and I do want to create another round with a similar design, just improved. However, this is all going to be when I have the free time to be able to take on a project like this. So once again, everybody, thanks for listening to this small mini episode on my Level Keyboard project. I really am thankful that I was able to do this, and I will see you next time. Thanks again.